You're listening to episode 132 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Filmmaker Adam Eurich speaks with us about the development of his movie, Seeking Heartwood. What does Buddhism look like in all its diversity in contemporary society? How is it taking root and growing in the variety of different conditions we find today in America, in the UK, in Australia, Germany, Austria, and France? And perhaps even more importantly, how do we contribute to this change rather than just being consumers of it? How do we give back? For some people, it's teaching. For others, it's supporting their local sangha or writing a blog. There are so many ways we clever little bipeds can create, can build, can nurture. What ways do you use your talents every day? A self-educated one-man documentary filmmaking crew, Adam Eurich originally studied engineering at UT Austin. After a 5-year career as a structural engineer in Washington, D.C., he left that life behind to explore his passion, Buddhism. Prior to this major change, he had practiced for over 10 years in nearly every major tradition, interviewing with Zen masters, surviving the Theravadan Vipassana retreats, and performing Tibetan rituals and visualizations. To further explore Buddhism in America, he embarked on what has become a 21-month-long road trip to create a documentary film about the Buddha's teachings and how they're manifesting in our modern society. Adam documents his journey into American Buddhism through a blog and photography on his site, seekingheartwood.com. Special thanks to our dear friend Linda Blanchard for introducing me to Adam. This episode would not have happened without your foresight and kindness. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice, cool drink from Mountain Stream. Can you tell I just got back from Colorado? And our guest today is Adam Eurich. Adam, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ted. It's an absolute pleasure. I've been listening to your podcast on the road for about a year now, and it's a real joy to finally be on it.
And it was a great joy to meet you in person recently. At the time of recording this is right after the Buddhist Geeks conference, and you were the first person there that I saw that I recognized, and you were off in the distance. You were, of course, doing the film thing. You were taking pictures and all, but you had your baseball hat on. I knew it was you.
Yep.
It was just
That's me with a bunch of long, scraggly hair sticking out.
So what we're here to talk about is a movie that you are working on called Seeking Heartwood. Before we get to the guts of that, though, tell us about your background.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Abilene, Texas, and my parents didn't really raise me in any real religious context. My kind of ethnicity is Filipino, and which are normally Catholic, and my mom definitely was. But it seemed like they're kind of a segment of Americans who weren't quite middle class, and so they seemed very concerned with work and this sort of thing. So church wasn't a big priority. My biggest emphasis from them was always just to be a good person and have a good heart. Um, so that's kind of what I took into Texas, into Abilene, which was a very Christian dominant culture. And actually, I've heard this many times that it has more churches per square mile than any other city in the nation. I don't know if it's actually true, but it sure felt like it. Because what I'm doing with this film, I actually did before with Christianity. Obviously not on this level, but in my teens, Christianity was such a predominant force in all the other youths around me that I really wondered, what is this about? I hadn't had much exposure to it, so I went to just about everybody's church. I must have went to about 60 or 70 of them, kept a journal of my experiences, wrote down people, how they behaved, what the teachings were like, the subjects, how people treated me, and I learned more about just people and individuals than about the religion itself. But I walked away from it not really feeling like it was for me, but it made me curious about what would be for me. So I had a paper to write in high school, and they let me pick a book off the list of kind of standard classics, and I picked and in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, not having any knowledge. Yeah, not having any knowledge of Buddhism, and I read it, and it did something to me that I'm not even sure to this day, because I've read the book 4 or 5 times since. What's fascinating about it was that it kicked off my interest in Buddhism because I didn't see the Buddhism in it when I first read it. I saw a lot of motorcycle maintenance, a lot of philosophy, a lot of a man's relationship with himself, his son, the country, and I really took a lot out of it. But because the Buddhism wasn't explicit in it, that's what kicked off my interest in Zen. And then I went to the local library in Abilene, Texas, where I found all the classics on Zen. Never checked out, plenty of dust on them. I even remember seeing books that I swear must have been from like Yubakin organization about dukkha and anatta and anicca, and like flipping through it and having no idea what this stuff possibly was. But the Zen stuff spoke to me. But it's interesting, I've gone back and read that book, and now I see how much he hid Buddhism in there, and I find it a really beautiful piece of art because the Buddhism's there in story. It doesn't need to be explicit. It doesn't need to use any Pali words, any Tibetan words, anything like that. And in the end, he resolves, his conflict with who he really is through compassion for his son. And if that's not in many ways a Buddhist lesson, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, it is very much so. And that book and Bob Persig's experiences are near and dear to our hearts here in Minneapolis because a portion of the proceeds from the profits of that book went towards buying the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. And he's one of the founders of that. So that's a very important book to a lot of us here.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, and I've been meaning to look into him and to see how deep did his relationship in Buddhism go, because he talks about kind of like this hard enlightenment experience, and I'm very curious about, because I'm curious about Zen, not just Zen, but enlightenment experiences in general. So, but I'm getting a little off topic. So, started reading the Zen stuff, spoke to me in a way that nothing else did. I mean, when you're a teenager, number one, you have a push and pull going on inside of you that I feel is largely biological. And if you are any kind of a self-aware, have some self-awareness at that age, you feel like there's this momentum inside of you, and it's pushing you to feel things emotionally and strongly in a way that you, when you come out of it, don't really feel like it was you and wasn't really necessary. And so for me, the idea of sitting on a cushion and doing nothing and becoming familiar with that inner push and pull and hopefully becoming free of it in some way really appealed to me at that age. So I started doing Zazen when I was about 18, and basically on and off, no teachers in Abilene, Texas. I went to school in college in Austin, Texas, really explored Buddhism there and found a couple Zen places to sit at and a couple sitting groups. But, I was in engineering school, rushing to get in and out. I got out in 3 years, so I didn't really pursue it as in-depth as I would have liked. But then I moved to DC, became a structural engineer, and found myself a Zen master, find myself some local 10-day Vipassana retreats, found the Shambhala Center, found some local Thai monasteries. So I really got to finally hit my stride in terms of my Buddhist practice and my exposure to the different traditions. So, and that pretty much takes me to where I began the film.
To your turning point. So it's interesting that you've done on your own, and it seems that you were doing this before you even encountered Buddhism, and you're going to many different Christian churches when you were younger, that you were really checking out a lot of different ways to approach this on your own. And that came up in the Buddhist Geeks conference when someone had asked about, finding the right teacher, and Ken MacLeod had some very good advice around that, is to, check around. And it seemed that you were doing that on your own naturally.
Absolutely. And plus I was just fascinated by people's passion for something that didn't seem to exist. And I don't mean that in a detrimental way, but it didn't seem concrete in terms of, my family upbringing was very practical. It's around you, building relationships with people, very community driven, doing well in school, and it felt like this thing above and beyond that, and I felt like I was missing out, and wanted to know more about that, and see if people were really getting something useful out of it that helped them live their lives better. Because people were definitely making life choices based on this stuff. And that's a lot of responsibility to put on, religion or a philosophy or concepts or ideas.
Mm-hmm. So you've had all this exposure to a lot of different ways in which people are engaging with this practice, and you snap and you decide to do a film. Tell us about what led up to that and how you made that decision. Because had you had background in filmmaking yet to this point?
Not at all. And I can tell you a little bit about how I overcame that.
Yeah, please.
So, doing the structural engineer thing in DC, working on Smithsonian projects, all these houses for rich politicians, CEOs of major companies, all that fun stuff. Really working hard. I worked hard in school. I finished early, got a great job, kind of did everything the way my family, would have liked me to, and the way it seemed society in general kind of seemed to funnel me into. But after 5 years of that, and working long hours and weekends, and ultimately feeling kind of another thing that brought up at the Buddhist Geeks conference was a little bit of a moral outrage in terms of not the company or the people itself, but in terms of what was I doing in this world? What was I contributing to? And that eventually came to a crisis when I just got burnt out, and just realized I was complaining all the time and I wasn't happy. Yet I had so much stuff. I had a great job, great income, awesome toys. I had a cool projector, surround sound system, like a great big apartment in Bethesda, Maryland. I loved it for a while. But then it felt like, okay, I did everything. I built my life up. I'm a model, middle class American, 26 years old. What more could I do? But I was unhappy with the job, with the work I was doing, unhappy with myself in terms of maybe how well I relationships, maybe how much I complained about myself, maybe how much I felt like there was no meaning in my life, kind of the typical things that push people to kind of questioning their lives and possibly even into religion or philosophy. And so it did that for me, and I had such a strong interest in Buddhism already that's kind of what I felt like, okay, if I'm really interested in this stuff, if I really love it, if it's my passion, I really do have this giant bookshelf, in my living room filled with Buddhist books. I think I want to do something with it. If that's what I'm really passionate about, am I gonna, this sounds awful, grow old and die at this engineering firm, or I guess take this one opportunity in my life to really pursue what I find the most fascinating. And what I find the most fascinating is Buddhism and people's relationship with it. And more than that, my relationship with it, because I was a practicing Buddhist of different traditions, and well studied, and had everything I could want out of this kind of materialistic American life, and I wasn't really getting where I wanted to be in terms of being happy with where I was at in life. So it felt like I was kind of failing on a couple levels. Failing as a Buddhist, in some ways, and wondering if Buddhism had failed me also, because it kind of seemed like contentment, peace, happiness, being kinder and more compassionate seemed to be the direction it was supposed to help me go towards. And I don't know entirely if it had. And it's interesting to look back now, because I understand I didn't really take Buddhism and internalize it enough. I didn't take it and look at, okay, well, what am I doing with my life? I see so many great examples of people now who internalize their understanding of Buddhism and really don't make the mistake I did, which was keep up with your lifestyle but stay a Buddhist. But their understanding of Buddhism has evolved to the point that they've realized that they do have to change some of their lifestyle. And it's just interesting because I feel like that's a greater reflection of what I see in how Americans are adapting to Buddhism. I see this evolution towards, we're all doing this to kind of be happier and be more peaceful in our stressed out lives, but some people are getting to realize, well, we should start changing our lives too, not just sitting so we can deal with these stressful lives.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's one of the developments that occurs. You might engage with this practice to help you with stress or something of that nature, but then it makes you a better person in society.
It makes you pay attention, to things that you kind of just assume that you should go along with, and that's what I've really gotten out of it. So, I have to admit, when I started this project, I felt like I wasn't happy, and Buddhism kind of promised me happiness to a way. This is my self-titled thinking, my first world attitude. So I'm going to go out and see what is this stuff really about, and can it really offer transformation for people? I'm being kind of radically honest about my original intentions here, because they've changed, and I've grown a lot since starting this project, and my understanding of Buddhism and myself and people and the society has all changed considerably since then, and that initial angst, which I think is not necessary, but useful sometimes in exploring things and getting to the root of things, has kind of died down. But I have to admit, I was a little disappointed with Buddhism in my life.
So the year was 2010.
2010.
What happened? What did you decide to do? How did this take shape? What was the action you finally took?
So the action that finally really kicked it off is a little kind of personal, but
it's only a couple thousand people listening. It's okay.
That's okay. So I was studying under a Zen master. I won't say who, because it doesn't really matter. The point was, I was immersed in a cultural form of Buddhism, and getting kind of swept away in it, and excelling at it, not necessarily a koan practice, because that has always been difficult for me, but I kind of felt like I took to it. But then there was this woman there who was terminally ill, and every Wednesday night I would go, and I felt like I really, especially because I read so much, I understood what the teacher was saying, I understood kind of the direction of the meditation, and some of these more esoteric concepts. But she was very frustrated by the experience. She didn't have much time left, and it seemed like at the end of her life, she decided that she really needed to find some peace, and really needed to know if there was something out there that could console her before she passed away. And she had been doing this stuff for many years, so specifically under this teacher. And she would come up to me afterwards, and she would just cry and ask to be hugged, and would just basically tell me, how do you get this stuff? I've been trying to get this stuff for years, and I don't understand it. I'm frustrated by it, I don't get anything out of it. And how come, why is that? And I couldn't really, I had no idea what to say to her. I just held her and gave her some pat answer like, well, I read a lot. I don't even know what I said. I just felt inadequate. I felt like Buddhism was inadequate, and I felt like it didn't have to be like that, that things could really be improved. And this came in combination with feeling burnt out at work. It came in combination with doing some Goenka retreats, Goenka style retreats, and having a bunch of people tell me that I need to drop my Zen practice, that I need to focus only on that practice. And I continue doing other things that eventually, would lead me in the wrong direction.
And of course, theirs was the correct one to do.
Absolutely. And I was a little used to that being from Texas and looking into Christianity. So, and really it came down to those two things happened together in about the span of a month. And I was listening to this rapper, Immortal Technique, who's this really awful, kind of filthy rapper who raps about social revolution and raps about, kind of the drug rings in Colombia and how America affects that relationship and just all these things that I felt like he was bringing attention to things in the world that needed to be improved. And what was I doing in my life? And so just listening to that guy, I felt like I'm going to do something. And remembering this woman, I felt like this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a camera and I'm going to go around the country and I'm going to find out how well people express Dhamma. How can we overcome this disconnect between a Korean monk, sent to America on a mission to spread Dhamma, and an American woman that's passing away and wants to get something out of it? How can I help that relationship? Because it must have happened many times around the country already. I haven't really talked about this in a while.
It's challenging looking back and seeing some of the reasons why we do the things that we do, but what I'm hearing from you now is that this is based on a compassionate awareness of a gap and wanting to learn more about that gap.
Yeah, I mean, the gap was in myself and my relationship to this stuff, and the gap was in what I saw in other people's relationship to Buddhism. And I wanted to pay close attention to that gap and see if something could be done about it. I wanted to take this attitude of, well, I wanted to take the sentiment that I shouldn't go out and explore and rebel against it because I felt like there's a quote by Stephen Batchelor that, let me see if I can remember it off the top of my head, that I'll paraphrase. The quote is, Buddhism provides lucid answers to questions, but the problem is sometimes these things become institutionalized to a degree that the stammering voices that ask the questions aren't heard. And that's what I felt like I was seeing in myself and some of the other practitioners around me. So I wanted to really ask my questions. I wanted to know, what is enlightenment? Is it real? Are there anybody who is enlightened? What did the historical Buddha say? How did that message change and alter over time? How did different cultures adapt it? And how were Americans going to adapt it? Because I had a difficulty, and I saw other people's difficulty with adapting a Japanese Buddhism to American culture, a Korean Buddhism to American culture, a Tibetan Buddhism to American culture. And I had read so many books of people who had bridged that gap, of people who, like Ken MacLeod, for example, who went to Tibet and did this and brought it back and now was actually particularly skillful at relating Buddhist teachings to Americans in a way that didn't have anything to do with Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, he does if you really look, and he does definitely know how to bring out the Tibetan Buddhism, but if you look at his overall presentation, he really makes it about you and your experience and what you're feeling and what's the motivation behind the question you're asking. And these are the types of things I wanted to see.
So you basically left your life behind and started a journey. What were those first steps like?
The first steps were calling up my folks and telling them, everything you've helped me achieve, I'm gonna not do that anymore. I'm gonna quit and I'm gonna go on the road and I'm gonna bring a camera and I'm gonna talk to meditation teachers around the country and I'm gonna meditate and I'm gonna live in monasteries and I'm gonna see how far the rabbit hole goes.
How did they
Um,
respond to that?
they were like, "Oh, okay," and I have awesome parents. They bought me my first camera that Christmas of that December when I got back. So they were very supportive. And I think after 5 years of feeling kind of my soul, so to speak, be sapped from, really working hard and not really feeling like it was going towards anything meaningful. My dad's a drug and alcohol counselor in the military. My mom's been a elementary school teacher her whole life. I mean, these are two people I really looked up to in terms of what they did for the people around them. And felt like, I wanted to do something about that. And my interest is Buddhism, so can I do something to help people who are interested? And now that's changed into, how can I help the world at large with Buddhism in general? So I pack up all my stuff in a storage unit in DC, hit the road, spend that Christmas with my parents, and then just drive. The first place I went was a little retreat center in San Antonio, Texas, outside of San Antonio, Texas, just to kind of decompress and meditate, not really learn anything, just kind of take a break, recover a little bit from 5 years of, a lot of overtime work in a big city. And then I just started Googling how to make film and Buddhist centers in America. I spent the first year of this trip without a lot of aim. I would just go around from city to city, visiting meditation groups, seeing Dhamma talks, and just listening, observing, and paying attention, and taking notes, having conversations with people about what their practice was, what were they getting out of it, how was it affecting their relationships and their daily life, did they ever know anybody that they thought was enlightened, even these types of questions, nothing was taboo for me, and really trying to get a sense of this nation's relationship with this new tradition that was kind of growing to me pretty radically all over the place. I mean, I don't think I went to very many cities that I found no Buddhism in. My hometown, of course. So I didn't tell people about the film. I didn't really call attention to myself. I just wanted to see what this stuff was about. I filmed anything and everything. I filmed out of the car. I filmed, all the cool sights I saw around the country. I'd never seen the Grand Canyon and the Badlands and Yosemite and all this stuff. So it was all fodder for spending some time alone, contemplating, doing a lot of meditation, seeing a lot of Dhamma talks, listening to a lot of people, doing a lot of retreats, living at monasteries, and practicing filming, practicing asking questions, writing what I want to ask people, spending time on filmmaking forums of which camera to buy, which lens to get, how to do this as cheap as possible. I mean, a real DIY Buddhism, a real DIY how to make a film. I feel extremely fortunate to be at an age where I can make a film for 15 grand or less, thereabouts. I can get all the gear I need. I can get a computer where I can edit the footage on while at a McDonald's in the middle of Missouri, and I can just go and do this. And I read a book about Buddhism in America that talked about this being the heroic age still. And that's really interesting, and that's a really great time to be in. So I'm in this combination of flexibility in terms of digital media, a new religion kind of establishing itself in this country, and the fact that there's been one or two solid generations who really developed this stuff is really advantageous. And those people are having a tremendous impact on how this practice is perceived by, the country at large. So why not take a snapshot of that? And because it's really fascinating, I feel these days like an anthropologist more like anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really wanted to learn about Buddhism, and I really ended up learning a lot about people, which really, in turn, helped my understanding of Buddhism. So, and the other thing I wanted to message that I spent the first year reading the Pali Canon. I haven't gone through all of it, But the Majjhima Nikaya, the Digha Nikaya, the Samyutta Nikaya, and some of the numerical discourses have been the structure that gives me the foundation in terms of what's common to all these traditions, how to relate to the different traditions in terms of the history and the evolution of their practices. And honestly, what I was missing from my relationship with Buddhism, I found in the Pali Canon.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, a lot of people say that.
Yeah, there's a voice there that needs to be heard, in my opinion, that I think that a lot of people would really respond to if that was their impression, if that was their first impression of Buddhism. And I mean, not to make fun of anything, but if that was their first introduction instead of a bunch of monks in red robes with hats that look like yellow mohawks banging on some instruments, I'm just saying how that's perceived for some people.
Right, that it's not that there's something bad about that, and you and I have discussed this before. This is not a disparaging of a different cultural context. It's just a recognition that it may not be our cultural context.
Exactly. And my interest, first and foremost, is in communication. As a filmmaker, I feel a responsibility that I'm putting something out into the world that is going to have real effects, if anybody ever sees it. So,
And they will.
yeah, we'll see. So, how effectively can the Dhamma be communicated to this culture in this time? And it's a huge obstacle because I'm looking to communicate to so many people at one time. It's still doable on some level. I get a lot out of reading the way that Buddha took people's existing conceptual frameworks and helped them see new facets of it, help them understand it in a new light. I love when he takes a young Brahmin and tells him, why are you praying to the six directions every morning? Why not let those six directions be kind to your parents, be kind to your family and friends, be kind to your coworkers. That's a message that speaks, I think, to Americans, because one of the most interesting things I've gotten out of reading the Pali Canon is his emphasis on how much morality will lead to your own personal happiness. That this is a message I feel that I needed to hear, and that I think other people would really enjoy hearing also. I mean, we all kind of know that if you treat people well, you feel good. But in America, there's this interesting dichotomy of overthinking things. Well, am I doing it for me? Am I doing it for them? I'm self-conscious about my reasons for doing it. Maybe I just won't do it all. Just worry about my family and take care of that, which is awesome too. But, so we'll take something like, we do feel like being a good person helps the other person and us. Then we'll overthink it. We'll be self-referential about it. And then we'll kind of lose that original power. And I think that as many things as possible in the mass media, just encouraging people to be kinder to each other, we need as much of that as possible.
So for people who are listening or interested in the Pali Canon who might not have taken a look on the webpage for this episode, just so you know, I'll be putting links to those books out there so you can go take a look if you haven't before. A lot of that material is on the web for free. If you want the books themselves, I can't recommend it enough. If you don't want to get them through the site, go to the library, because some of them are there as well. Get them through their library loan. It really is very, very interesting and can be very inspiring reading, regardless of your cultural background or your religious background.
Absolutely, and regardless of what tradition of Buddhism you like. I actually get a good deal of email from people asking why I'm so interested in the Pali Canon, that these things that have come along later are actually better at expressing these things. And I say maybe, but take something like the Heart Sutra. If your understanding of the five aggregates of Sariputra and his relationship with the Buddha and the Dhamma, if you understand the whole background behind what that author was referencing, it will definitely enhance your understanding of that sutra.
Tremendously.
All of these things are just more modes of expression
understanding that Mahayana was a response and not just a cultural adaptation, but a response to what came before it, to the Theravada traditions, helps enrich both in our understanding and practice of them.
Exactly. I mean, and I'd really love to see American Buddhists really take on, this the joy of looking at the history of Buddhism and how these ideas developed and where they came from, and what person stood up and said, we don't like this, and we're going to alter this, because it's all advantageous. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just, it really makes this tradition alive for you and enriches your understanding of it.
So, Adam, you've traveled around and you've got a lot of interviews under your belt. You've been doing this for a few years now. How much material have you got? You mentioned this before we started the interview, but I want you to share with with the listeners how much you've got.
So I have 3.5 terabytes worth of footage. In this, on the cameras I'm using, I'm getting 10 gigabytes. I'm getting an hour of footage. So this is a wealth of stuff. Dhamma talks all around the country. I actually kept some video diaries of my experiences doing retreats, because they were helpful to me afterwards. But interviews, I mean, just cool travel footage of all around the country. I mean, just a wealth of things. I've filmed just about everything I possibly can. Whatever someone will allow me to put a camera in front of and they'll sign a release, I try to film. You never know what's going to come out of it. Some of the best stuff is just conversations between people. Just showing that this is a really alive, exploring tradition that involves a lot of creativity and a lot of connection between people sharing their ideas about how to practice and what this stuff means to them. And I think you and I both saw that to a great deal at the Buddhist Geeks Conference.
Mm-hmm. We did, and there are references to it being a living tradition because we're asking questions, because there is adaptation and there is change going on. It is not ossified into something that is immovable.
Yeah. And especially in America, I mean, I have gotten to sample Buddhism from every country around the world, essentially, without ever leaving the country, without needing a passport, with a couple gas tanks, and getting to really explore the cultures, the traditions, the teachings. And you know what? Like, all of it's useful. All of it's an amazing perspective on something that is very subtle and very profound and very difficult to put into words. The Buddha himself said this, and I couldn't agree more, And I've really enjoyed, I'll say this real quick, I've really enjoyed meeting with people that I initially disagreed with.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, what a Buddhist practice to go around and talk to people who reveal your own personal attachments that you have about views and how to express things. That's a wonderful way to open up and find out your relationship to how you think and your rationale and your attachment to Buddhism,
So Adam, you've spoken to a great many people since you started the project. What was the most meaningful encounter to you personally? What's the thing that resonated with you most, and what made it that meaningful?
Well, I actually think it's what we touched on already, and that's the Buddha's voice in the Pali Canon. I mean, that really, I'll say this, I won't go too into detail about it, but I got to go to a monastery in the middle of nowhere, and I had a monk who, instead of giving me Dhamma talks, read the Pali Canon to me every night. And I did a retreat, and I would meditate. He would read me the Pali Canon, give me instructions from the Pali Canon, and I would do the meditation, and then I'd have an interview the next day. He'd listen to what I had to say, and then he would pick another sutta based on what I was experiencing at that time in my meditation. Now, this is an experience that is very uncommon in America, or in the world in general, and I found extremely beneficial. Because it wasn't like I was just reading the Pali Canon by myself, which I actually think can be a little difficult, but I had someone who was more experienced and knew more about it than I, leading me through my meditative experiences based on the Buddha's original words, or as close we can get to them. And that was a game changer for me. Those 10 years of practice that I really felt, I wondered if they went anywhere. I know now they probably did, but the amount of progress I made once I started that was pretty staggering in my meditative practice. My level of competency in my own meditation grew dramatically, which allows me to make a better film about Buddhism. So, because this is the kind of thing that you can't have a Hollywood guy come in and make a film about Buddhism in America and not know anything about it and not have to practice. I mean, someone can do that, but how much more would a film about Buddhism benefit the country if it came from a serious practitioner who was really devoted to it? So,
Yeah, that makes a big difference, and it sounds like the most important interview that you had is with the person that you never actually spoke with, Buddha.
And I've explored ideas of doing, how people do docudrama stuff, and having him there and interviewing him, and having him say stuff on the ball again. When you're a filmmaker, you really got to explore like the boundaries of what can I do with this medium, and I really would love to do stuff like that in the future. Like what I would really love is, I've heard that there's a big high budget Buddhism film, a film about the Buddha in the works in Hollywood, and I'd love to make this film and then go, oh, you're wonderful, come make this film about the Buddha, something like that. But yeah, that's definitely the voice that has had the largest impact on me. But he said, right before his death, that don't think you don't have a teacher, that I've left a great deal of Dhamma for you, and let that be your teacher.
Yeah, it's not about me. It's this teaching, and you do it yourself.
Yeah, and going back to that stuff, again, I can't emphasize this enough. Revolutionized my understanding of Buddhism. So because there's a lot of things we hear over and over again as Buddhists: the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and when you hear that in like an Asian studies class, or when you hear a friend say that to you when you're curious about Buddhism, it doesn't always ring true. It doesn't always really get to you. You can hear it and kind of gloss over it and not really think any more of it.
It's very abstract. It's just words on a page.
Exactly. Dukkha, craving, being the origin of suffering. I mean, these are things that I never understood until I really delved into those suttas and learned to see these things in my meditation. I think the biggest thing that all of us are really doing in our meditative practices, because I really do want to know what's the common thing between all these traditions. I mean, a lot of people have that question. What are we all fundamentally doing that makes this a Buddhist practice? And can we do these wildly different meditative techniques and have it really go to the same goal? And I think that if your meditation practice is allowing you to experience the cessation of suffering on some level, that if it's allowing you to reduce your craving on some level, then that's a Buddhist practice. So take, for example, a noting practice. I got exposure to a lot of noting practices, and if you think about what that does to you when something arises in you and you call attention to, you note what it is. I mean, what does that really do for you? It makes you aware of it, and your awareness of it transforms it to something that was unconsciously had some inertia and was moving forward. And this is something that I really do think speaks a lot to craving and this momentum of things inside of us that are moving forward. And when you note, what it can do is it can cause you to pay attention and relax that craving and back off and see that momentum kind of driving your attention forward into something and narrowing it down, and kind of return to this open awareness. And when you're doing that, you really are bringing about the cessation of craving. And by bringing about the cessation of craving, bringing about the cessation of suffering. If you have a loving kindness practice and a forgiveness practice or anything like that, those things can all potentially do the same thing, reduce that craving, allow you to see it over and over and over again in your meditation, because I think we do ultimately have to see it over and over again, and really find relief through that. So that's something I'm kind of, ideas I'm exploring with and playing with, because you have to understand, like, I'm the interviewer. I actually don't have to express my ideas about these things very often. I really I get to, and in the film, ultimately, I am ultimately relying on people who have a much better experience and foundation and study in this stuff to tell the story of Buddhism in America, to relay the Buddha's voice to Americans. So doing this interview is actually really interesting because I haven't really had a chance. It's funny, not many people ask what I think about this stuff, you know? So I know I'm kind of all over the place right now.
But that's
Sorry.
part of the practice that we're doing in our contemporary Western culture is we're seeing this as being more of a sharing between people equals who are on a journey and less the doling out from a hierarchical structure. There isn't as much interest in that in our cultural context. So asking each other about this, I think, is going to be a much larger part of a, shall we say, a non-denominational, if we don't use the word secular or whatever particular way we want to label it, is what's this going to be for us? And I think that's part of it, is our sharing. Our Kalyanamitta is going to be a much more important part of our practice than it has been perhaps in the past.
I think so too, I've seen that a lot already, and I see us going in that direction of Buddhism being, especially in some of the really great teachers, Buddhism being something that people are exploring together. And maybe a teacher has been seen a little more and can help you see a little more, but there's so many awkward phases to growing in Buddhism and growing in your understanding of it, that it's nice to see it at a popularity level where people are really interacting about this stuff, helping each other through these phases, relating to each other, and ultimately, it really benefits everybody a great deal,
Yeah.
So,
So speaking of confusing or perplexing things that have come up in your travels and the folks that you've spoken with, what was one of the more odd or confusing things that you've heard, a teaching or a practice? What made you scratch your head and go, huh?
so I went to a cult. I won't say where it was or what the organization was because they really don't have a name. It's one of these places, but it was one of these. Oh, tell me about your project. Really, that's interesting. There's some people you should go meet. I'm going to give you their number, and you call them up, and they'll come pick you up, and they'll take you to their center, and you spend some time there. And then it's very difficult to leave the center once I get there. And everybody's dressed the same, and there are some really interesting personality quirks and hierarchy and leader structures that I would highly question, and teachings that I would highly question, that try to combine Buddhism with a lot of other things and kind of meld it into, that founder's ideas about what this stuff is.
I have a sneaking suspicion that isn't going to last so well. That will resonate with a very finite number of people in the United States.
Yeah, yeah, but it's important to know that these things are still around. And it is being reduced over time. And I mean, I've looked into the past 30, 40 years of that dark side of any spiritual practice. And as Buddhism becomes more popular, people can't get away with that stuff as much anymore. So it's already getting there. But it was a bizarre experience that I will never forget. Having to, you know, I went I drove there, having my keys taken away from me, them not letting me leave, having to have a 4-hour conversation with someone who's supposed to be enlightened, and know full well the ways they were trying to manipulate me and try to keep me there.
How did
And,
you finally escape? Because it
oh,
sounds like a situation where you had to
yeah,
dig a tunnel or climb the barbed wire fence.
yeah. I essentially just walked away, saying I was going to have to. I just needed a break from what we were discussing. And I just went from room to room and looked for my keys and grabbed them and just took off, and left the gated grounds as people were running out on the lawn to convince me to stay. So
Wow.
I don't know if that's a good answer either, but that is
I
the
think
weird
I think
thing.
that's a very cautionary tale answer.
I mean, when you want to go out and explore everything, and I have to admit, I wanted to see that part. I wanted to know if that part was out there, because it's important to know about these things. It's important to have a relationship with relationships with the communities that try to isolate themselves. You need to do that by being friendly and kind and being willing to listen and being willing to learn. Because if you just dismiss them, then you're really keeping that process going. You know,
Yeah.
you don't think that has to happen. So I took a lot out of it, and you know, I'll go back, and I don't know what it'll be like, but you never know. You know,
I'm going to recommend you give them a key to your car that's a copy.
yeah, right. That doesn't work either. So, you know, again, I can't emphasize enough the groups of people in America that you don't think about, you know, Buddhist or otherwise. I would love to create a film that inner city kids would enjoy learning about Buddhism with. I would like to see programs. You know, I've seen a lot of great work around the country bringing meditation to prisons and this sort of thing, but I think that there are so many aspects of American culture that would really love some great Dharma.
I think that's a good answer on the confusing stuff. Another question I wanted to ask you is, in looking back from when you started this project to today, how have you grown? What are some of the ways in which you have changed just working on this?
That's a really big question. I mean, I am nothing like the person who started this project.
Who was that person? What was he like?
That person was a little hot-headed, a little static in his views, a little entitled and frustrated and confused. And I had good intentions then. You know, I saw problems I wanted to fix. I'm glad my motivation for this project has changed. So, but now I'm happy, Ted. Like, Buddhism has made me happy. Buddhism has made me content, peaceful. I really care about people. I really feel like I've cultivated that compassion and kindness. I found it easy. I found it fun. Found it remarkably simpler than I thought it was going to be, and remarkably effective. My relationships with things I don't like has changed dramatically. You know, like, I understand what happens. Dependent origination, something I knew nothing about before, but actually really helps me go, okay, this person said a viewpoint, my ear heard it, my mind had a perception of it, and because of the perception reaching into my memory, I had a negative feeling associated with it, and I didn't like it. And then I thought about the reasons I didn't like it. And then I reached into my habitual reactions, you know, and then I acted on those things, you know, and now I understand this process, you know, because of Buddhism, because of hearing so many different people talk about their understanding about it. Ken McLeod asked me when I interviewed him, which was awesome interview because I didn't get to ask him any questions. Every question was about me, as he is wont to do. But he asked me, why are you doing this? Why are you asking all these other people about their opinions? And because it helps me, it's like when you travel to different countries and you see other cultures, there's a way it opens you up that this film has done for me, going around and speaking to different traditions and different teachers, you know, a way that it's changed my expectations of how anyone is supposed to live with life and deal with their experiences, you know, Buddhism or not. I really care, like, about Buddhism in this country dramatically. I think before, my frustration has turned into a real love and compassion for the people involved with this stuff. I mean, life is kind of hard to me in general, you know, and Buddhists are taking a path to encountering that difficulty, encountering that struggle, and trying to understand it so that they can be not just happier, but be better individuals in this world. Getting into Buddhism because I wanted to be a better person than I was, I find that that's actually really common motivation, and you gotta respect that. I've seen that this is a living, breathing practice that is always going to change. It's going to continuously change. That's exciting, and I love it, and I appreciate it. You know, and the more it does, and the more it branches out, and the more it explores, the more it can fill in those gaps for people who just happen to be in a circumstance where the one they're hearing doesn't work for them. Now there's a whole plethora of voices, so many conversations going on, that if that person decides to explore, I really think they're going to find something that they like that really works for them. So, and that's what I'd love to see in American movies.
So, Adam, when do you think that the movie might be ready for release? And will you come back and speak with us about it when it does?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it'll be interesting for me to even do another interview about this and see how I've changed again, and see how what kind of film I'm trying to make has changed again. So, I'm hoping to wrap actual filming early next year, and then I'll do a good 6 to 8 months of solid editing, some post production. Hopefully, the end of 2013, very early 2014, I will have a completed 2 hour film somehow out of all of this footage to give people, to really show them the just cream of the crop in American Buddhism, just how wonderful and outstanding, you know, these things can be communicated to people in our culture, how relevant it is to just being a human being, regardless of American, regardless of Buddhist or anything else, just how do you relate to the things going on in your head? How do you struggle with your experience? There's a lot of fantastic guidance that this tradition can offer people.
Adam, tell us a little bit about the Kickstarter campaign.
So what I'd like to share about that is that this is a project that I love American Buddhists to help create. I want people to know that my intentions with this and spreading the Dhamma are as pure as possible. I have spent all of my own money, every cent I have, all my savings, my 401k, everything to get me to this point. I've taken it as far as I can, and I just want people to know, that I think I can really create something that can make this world a better place, and that I hope people will contribute to that.
What you're talking about is the quality that most presented itself when we met in person, Adam, is your open sincerity. That read very clearly and very strongly in who you have become. If you may not have been that person at the start of this project, you certainly are now, and that shows. And what you're talking about here is your commitment to this, and how important it is for us to contribute, not just be consumers of the Dhamma, but contribute, to give something back, to see that change. It's not just about what we do on the cushion, but about making that positive change. And with you in this film, that's the way you're doing that. You're committed to that, and that open sincerity shows.
Thank you. That's much better than I could have put it into words, so I really appreciate that.
Meant every word. I am quite sincere about that. I meant every word of that, because that showed. And I think your immersion in the practice over the past couple of years working on this that's been the transformation for you that has developed the most, and more will come, because that's an ongoing journey. For folks who are listening to the podcast, I've got a couple things to tell you about. First is you should go to Adam's website, because it's awesome. The web address for that is seekingheartwood.com. And of course, there's a link to that on the podcast episode for this. And also, Adam has started a Kickstarter program that is, I'm releasing this episode the same day that Kickstarter is happening. So again, go to the episode page for this episode. I will have a link to that Kickstarter. I'm sure Adam would appreciate, and certainly I would, in talking with him about this movie. I want to see it happen. Go to that Kickstarter and help out, because we would like to see this come to fruition, and it will come to fruition. Be part of it. Help contribute to it. Our guest, again, is Adam Eurich. Adam, thank you very much for being here. We will be talking long before your movie hits the streets.
That's fantastic. It's an absolute pleasure being here, Ted. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.